All right, and we are recording. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off my screen, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Or good night. It depends on the part of the world in which you are living. I am Andrea Campeggio. I am an X Culture coach. And as you know, I am a former student of X Culture. I participated in the X Culture project last year. And I worked for a company called Odyssey, which is a Belgian startup working in the smart gardening business. And I graduated last year in management engineering in Politecnico di Milano in Milan, Italy. And my stream that I selected is international business. So my last exams were related to international business aspects and topics. And I chose to do my master thesis on entry mode dynamics because I really like this theme. And today we are going to take a very important theme, a very important topic related to cultural challenges and let's say every kind of business plan dealing with internationalization, which is market selection. I think the market selection is maybe the most important thing to be taken into account. So I will start talking about the most common mistakes that the students in these culture challenges are doing in order to, let's say, tell them some advices in order to avoid these mistakes. Then I will show you how to do a preliminary analysis in order to distinguish feasible countries and not feasible countries for the challenge, and then we will move to the really effective market evaluation. So what does it mean? We should start from analyze and find market success criteria, and then according to this criteria, we're going to evaluate markets. And then I will show you how to compare different markets. And finally, we will talk about the market analysis chapter. Maybe it's one of the most important chapters in the culture challenges. And we will discuss about what to include and what to not include. So I can start from the common mistakes. So what happened in usually in X culture challenges? Well, what I read, because I read some reports made by students, and usually they go for a market. They justify their choice according to what they said in the industry analysis, in the company analysis, which is very fine. But there's no a real explanation of why that market is the very best one in the world. So what does it mean? The reader receives the report and sees that the suggested market is a very good choice and is motivated, of course. But the reader could ask himself or herself if this market will be effectively the best one in the world. And what happens? It seems that teams chose markets in which they feel comfortable. So, for example, if a team has 3 members belonging to the US, they are grown up in the US, for example, most likely they are going to select US as a market. And of course, the choice it's motivated, but there could be another market that is more attractive than US. So in order to avoid this problem, I think that a preliminary analysis and then a market comparison should be done in order to demonstrate that in this case, US market is the very best in the world. So how to avoid this problem? I was sorry, I was telling you about preliminary analysis. What does it mean? Of course, preliminary analysis it's not mandatory. It's just let's say a recommendation, and I think it's very, very useful in case of startups and companies which are not so strong under the financial point of view, and companies which do not have so much international experience. In these cases, I think that preliminary analysis in order to assess, for example, the risk level in the countries would be a very good starting point in order to understand in which countries you can work actually. So I used to divide risk in three components, which are the financial risks, the economical risk, and the political risk. Of course, not all the components of risk have to be assessed because it depends on the company, it depends on the service or product that the company delivers. So starting for the financial risk, what is financial risk? Of course, is the risk related to financial aspect. And one way to measure the financial risk in a country is the availability of liquidity in the stock market or the volatility, for example, on the exchange rate and the currency value. Of course, these kind of measures are worth for very big companies which are investing much in that country and they are leveraging on high volumes, high sales. In this case, a variation of the exchange rate could have a very strong impact on the sales, on the revenues and on the return on investment that the companies have. In these cases, I think that a financial analysis could be very useful for a company. Financial risk analysis could be very useful for the company. The second level of risk is related to economic risk. So what does it mean? It can be very useful to understand the economic risk level in a country, for example, measuring the inflation or the expected inflation, because inflation can have a very, very strong impact on sales, on return on investment, even in the long term. And companies which are willing to stay in their country for a very long period of time should be aware of this kind of risk. Another risk that can be taken into account is the risk of default and the measurement related to this kind of risk is, for example, measuring the ratio between government debt and GDP. It's a very important proxy of the, the default risk, and it should be taken into account if the company is going to invest much in the country. Finally, we have the political risk that is very important in some cases. For example, nowadays, US and UK could represent very, very attractive markets, but there is some uncertainty about, laws that will be developed soon. And this kind of risk, this kind of uncertainty should be taken into account in doing a market selection activity. And other things to be taken into account are, for example, the political stability. So how much the government is stable and is effective in doing the activities. Corruption level, which could be a very important obstacle, most of all for startups. And unfortunately, we have to take into account also risk of wars, risk of conflicts that the country should have in the future years. This is, as I told you before, a kind of preliminary analysis related to risks, and it may strengthen your analysis if you are selecting a country, of course, that is safer under this point of view. I prefer to do another kind of preliminary analysis, which provides you with a set of countries which are considered safer, I would say. So I will show you a paper from two authors that are Bernard Toons and Ernst. And in this paper, we have a very, very useful tool that is a matrix. So let me share screen. Okay, can you see the matrix? Perfect. And the matrix has been built according to two different axes. As you can see, there is the ease of doing business here and corruption index on the other side. So what is the ease of doing business index? Of course, it is an index which accounts for the degree of ease of doing business in that country. So, for example, if the bureaucracy is not so strict, if procedures are smooth, and even a startup could do a business in that country. The other kind of how to measure ease of doing business, of course, we can measure it from the World Bank data. That is a very reliable source. If we go here and search for ease of doing business, okay. Here we have the ease of doing business for countries, and these are values counted in for 2017. So let's say it's a very recent value. So we can say, for example, that New Zealand is the best country in the world in ease of doing business, and is, of course, has a value of 1. As they tell here, the 1 is the most business-friendly regulation. So the lower is the value, the better is. And this is about analysis. The other one was the corruption index, and I can show you how to gather data about corruption index. If we go here, we can use as a source Transparency International, and you have this map in which they provide the index for every country. As you can see here, 100 is let's say the best value for low corrupted countries, and 0 is a very low indicator about this kind of measure. For example, New Zealand, even here, has a very high value, and if you go, for example, in Italy, is ranked 54th in the world. So maybe it's not the best country in which you can run a business. So according to the distinction, we can use this matrix that I showed you before in order to assess in a very quick way countries. So for startups, I think let's say the main target should be the transparent area in which the country is not corrupted, and in this country it's very easy to do a business. So I think this is a very good starting point in order to have an idea on which are the feasible markets, in order just a starting point, just to understand from which countries you can start the analysis. Now we can move to market success criteria, which that is the most important part of the analysis. Market success criteria, of course, are clustered in different groups, and the choice of market success criteria depends on the characteristics of course, of the company or the industry. And I would say that teams should consider a minimum of 3 success criteria up to a maximum of 5, because less than 3 is a too weak analysis, and more than 5, it means that each market success criterion should lose importance in the analysis as a whole. Well, which are these criteria? We start from geographic, and geographic aspects, of course, are related to the geography of the country. So we have, for example, the ease of access. If transportation is very important for your company, if the transportation costs should be monitored, ease of access could represent a very important aspect to be taken into account in this kind of analysis. And then we have, for example, another geographic important aspect is the weather condition. For example, there's a cultural challenge called escape, in which weather condition could be a very important aspect to be taken into account, and therefore, in the market success criteria, it's very important to be aware about the weather condition of the countries. What about demographic aspects? Demographic aspects are related to the population, the number of inhabitants of a country, which is, for example, a very important value for companies who are selling a mass market product, and they are willing to increase the level of sales and therefore in this case the number of inhabitants could be very important and it should be analyzed. Other demographic aspects could be, for example, the percentage, the distribution of gender and age. If you have, for example, a precise target, if you are targeting millennials, if you are targeting, I don't know, female population between 40 and 60 years, okay, you should consider also these demographic aspects. And finally, I think that education level could be another very important aspect to be considered. We have a challenge called UniCheck. UniCheck is a software for universities. In this case, measuring the education level in a country could be a very important starting point. And then we move to economic aspects. Economic aspects could be very, very, very important in some cases. In economic aspect, I recommend to all teams to consider the GDP per capita because it's a very reliable proxy about income level, and income level could be, for example, a starting point in the pricing strategy in the marketing section. So it should be very important as an indicator to be considered. For example, I can share with you my experience last year. As I told you before, I worked for ODC, and the company sells smart gardens, or small devices that allows you to grow plants even if you don't own a garden in your house. And this smart garden provides you with fresh food, organic food every day. And the problem was that the price of this product is a bit high, and we did a survey, and almost all the interviewed people said that they are not willing to buy this product at this price. So in this case, of course, the GDP per capita, the income level should be taken into account, because if, let's say, people have a higher percentage power, purchasing power, they should be taken into account because of the high price of the product. Then we can move to political and legal aspect. In some cases, they are very, very important. For example, we have a challenge that is called UniCheck, as I told you before. That is a software. And for software, especially if you go for licensing, it is very important to understand which are the levels of, let's say, the completeness of intellectual property protection laws. If there is a loss, a risk of intellectual property loss, this country should be avoided, for example. So it depends on the kind of service we are going to deliver. And this kind of laws should be taken into account in some industries. In software industries, I think it should be almost mandatory. Then we have, as I told you before, the ease of doing business, which is very, very important, most of all for startups. And corruption could be another important index, as we have seen before, to be taken into account. Then we can move to cultural aspects. Cultural aspects, in some cases, are very, very difficult to be measured, to be evaluated, to be assessed. But in some cases, cultural aspects are very, very important, because if you are basing your success of your product, of your service in a country, you should be aware that. Hello? I think that Samuel? Samuel? Okay, thank you. I was saying that cultural aspects, yeah, are very important, because the success of a product could be based on the cultural aspects of a country. And when you are willing to sell this product or deliver this service in another country, you should be aware of cultural differences among these two countries. In some cases, if the cultural distance is very high, the perspective of the same product, the same service, could vary a lot. So success in a country could be turned into a failure in another one. And I think that the most important aspect to be monitored in the cultural aspects for every kind of company is the customer habits and customer, let's say, preferences. For example, in Odyssey, since Smart Gardens provides you with fresh food, with organic food, I think that the percentage of organic food consumption per capita in countries is a very reliable and important aspect to be considered. In in vertical journey, a challenge that we have this year, monitoring, for example, a number of journeys per person or per family is very, very useful in order to assess at a glance let's say the number of journeys, the attractiveness of this market in this sense. Of course, it's much harder to get together this kind of data because you need specific research, but it's a very powerful tool in order to assess markets. Finally, we have the competitive environment analysis. Well, I think that these kind of aspects should be taken into account if the main reason of the internationalization of your company is to escape from competition. So if a company is experiencing very high competition in the domestic country, it should be willing to go to another country, to another region in the world in which the competition is lower. So I think that just in this case, the competitive environment analysis should be taken into account in the market success criteria. Of course, in some industries, it's very, very hard to measure the competitive environment. But as I told you, if the main reason of moving activities abroad is escaping from competition, therefore competitive environment analysis is a very important aspect, and it should be taken into account. So how to gather this data? Of course, the data about demographics and geography are very easy to be found. As I showed you before in the World Bank data, we have also the ease of doing business, but we have also data related to population, to gender distribution, to age distribution. So it's a very reliable source, and it will help teams a lot about how to find data. Of course, we have that also for income level, GDP per capita, GDP per country, and it is very reliable, as I told you before. Other kinds of measurements, of course, are harder, as I told you. How to measure industry-specific indicators or company-specific indicators, like the customer preferences, it is a bit harder, and teams should research for specific reports for really because it needs specific research. In my case of ADC, we found a report related to organic consumption in the world. In vertical journey, teams should find something related to preferences of journeys. So there is no just one source, but teams should find the report, the research in which these data are provided. Now, once we have the list of market success criteria, we are ready to evaluate markets. The problem is that data, here we are talking, for example, of quantitative data. But if the quantitative data are not homogeneous among each other, what does it mean? That, for example, indexes like ease of doing business or corruption indexes are absolute values, and because they are indexes. In addition, as you have seen so far, the ease of doing business is, let's say, a value of 1 is the best value ever, whereas according to the corruption index measurement, a value of 1 is the worst one, is the worst level, is the worst number that you can find. What happens that in this case you need as a kind of let's say you should use a system in order to make homogeneous the numbers among each other, because these are absolute numbers which work in a different way, but we have also percentages, for example, gender and age distribution. We have also real numbers like population or consumption per capita, GDP per capita. How to make these numbers homogeneous? You can use a 1 to 5 scale. You can use a percentage. And you can cluster countries according to some values, some success criteria, and assign, for example, the maximum point, the maximum score at the, let's say, the best class countries, and so on, evaluating all the other clusters. Once you have list of feasible countries, list of market success criteria in homogeneous, let's say, evaluated in an homogeneous way, you can compute an average for each country, and in this way you can, let's say, evaluate and compare markets among each other. In this way, you will be sure that the market they are going to select is the best one, because you have sources, you can demonstrate it with numbers, and the reader is sure that the market that you are going to select is the best one, because you have compared with other markets, and the numbers are saying that this market is the best one. Of course, the reader could not agree on the market success criteria selection, or on the, for example, the way in which you measured the market success criteria, but at least it's a way to demonstrate that the market that you are going to select is the best one. How to evaluate market? As I told you before, you can use average, you can use weighted average. If you think, for example, that a market success criterion is better, is more important than another one, you can assign, let's say, a higher weight, a higher percentage, and the final score, of course, will be based more on this criterion than other criterions, other criteria. So once you have the evaluation for each market, and you are going to select the best market from this list, you have done with the market selection, and you should move to market analysis. So what to include in the market analysis section? I think that most important things to list are the market success criteria. So teams should provide some information more about this criteria. If, for example, the population is a very important criterion, because the company relies on mass market, and the company needs a very, let's say, a very large, a very extended customer base. You should provide some information more about population, about market distribution, gender distribution, and so on. Teams should remember also to list not only the list of market success criteria in this chapter, but they should be aware that everything that is mentioned in another section should be included in the section that talks about the market description. For example, in marketing section, of course, the teams have to talk about pricing strategy. If pricing strategy is related to an increase of price, I think that GDP per capita or income level or unemployment rate should be included in the market description. Other suggestion is to avoid everything that is not useful for the company. Every kind of information, like religion, for example, if it's not directly related to an aspect that is considered in the whole report, should be avoided, because the reader, of course, usually is a CEO, is an executive, and he or she does not have so much time in order to read tons of reports. So teams should concentrate just on very important aspects. I can share with you another experience related to my challenge that I've done last year. Religion, in the great majority of cases, is not so important, and it should not be considered in its culture challenges. But Odyssey was selling the smart garden with let's say, a very emblematic name that is Eden. Eden is the name of the garden in the let's say, in the Christian religion, and if a country has this kind of religion, of course, the name Eden will produce some effects in the mind of people. So it was just a name, it was just let's say, the name of a brand, the name of a product. But for this thing, we had to consider the religion in the market description in the market analysis. So team should remember that everything is mentioned in somewhere in the report should be mentioned in the market analysis. So we have seen so far how to make a list of feasible countries, because I think that the starting point, the starting market is the world. Once you start from the world, you should divide countries in feasible and not feasible. Once you have identified feasible countries, you should concentrate there. You should focus your attention there, and you should start to evaluate countries that you have identified. How to evaluate? You have to find some market success criteria according to the company's characteristics, according to industry characteristics, and let's say try to gather data from reliable sources. Teams should remember to cite every source that they found. And once you have numbers, you have data, of course, you can have also qualitative data, for example, evaluation of the law related to intellectual property right protection. It's very hard to be evaluated in numbers. So in this case, you can use words like effective, not so effective, very bad, and so on. But the main purpose of this analysis is to make homogeneous the measurements. So teams can go with a scale from 1 to 5. They can go with a percentage evaluation or whatever, or assigning grade, for example, to each market success criteria in each market. Once team have a list of market success criteria that are homogeneous among each other, they can go with the evaluation, and in this way they're sure to select the very best market in the world. In this way, the analysis makes more sense and it's more attractive. I think another very good practice is to make an example of executive summary at the beginning of each section. So in the market success criteria, for example, I would suggest a list of 3 bullet points in which you say that you are going to do a preliminary analysis based on risk in order to split the world in feasible and not feasible countries. Then in the second point, you can say teams can say which are the main market success criteria that they are going to select. And finally, in the third point, of course, they should state which is the market, which is the country that they are going to select. In this way, the reader will be, let's say, more involved in the report, and I think it's more interesting, as reading something like that it should be, it should increase the degree of interest of the reader. And if teams can, let's say, attract conquer the interest of reader, of course, it's a very good thing, because tons of reports have been assigned to CEOs, to executives, and if something raises and it's let's say different from other works, of course, it's a very great plus. So I have nothing else to add. If you have any question, please ask me, and we will try to. So if everything is fine.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Concerning this webinar, I really appreciate what you are able to factors and the transparency factors of the number one, say a country that is corrupt, that is not likely for a potential investor to do a business there. What about for a country like in Nigeria, that is our level of corruption is let me say average rate, and we have this potential market whereby we have this population of over 190 million population, and the consumers are really ready to purchase the market, and they are able to buy the market, and the other factors available for the business to run effectively are available. But the only factor that is distinguishing it from other countries is just the corruption level. Is it advisable for the potential investors to still go ahead and invest in the business in the country?
Okay, I think the internet connection is not working so good. So let's say try to recap what you said, and please tell me if it's right. You told me that even potential countries should be taken into account. So if one market may not have, so let's say, very high values in the market success criteria that we have seen so far, but it has a very great potential about, for example, economic growing possibilities, it should be taken into account. I got the point. Or if you meant another kind of a, let's say, of a remind of recap, please write me in the chat as I can.
I think, Alana Wachu, I think it was some of those factors that that Andrea just recapped as far as economically they're ready to receive business, but there's some corruption. Is that correct, Alana Wachu? I'm just gonna.
Okay, yes.
You're muted right now. Oh, is there a chat? I think so. I did hear what if there is corruption. So I think that's what he was meaning. If all other factors are positive, but maybe the government is corrupt, how do you evaluate?
Well, as I showed you, on the website of Transparency International, we have a sort of reliable data about corruption. Mm-hmm. And corruption could be a very important problem for startups, or even more for foreign startups. And if a company, okay, perfect. If a company has very low international experience, it is not recommended to invest in a country which the corruption is higher. But of course, all the market success criteria have to be evaluated, and the main point is the different companies can accept different level of risk. So some companies could be, let's say, risk taking, some other companies could be risk adverse. So it depends on the company, but in selecting a market, corruption or political risk in general should be taken into account.
Mm-hmm. Good. So that was a really good question, Alana, and a really good answer, Andrea. So I'm very impressed. Yes. Any other questions? Okay. So thank you so much, Andrea. You were our first coach to do a webinar, and you absolutely did a fantastic job. I'm impressed with your knowledge, and you did a lot of research and had visuals. Great job overall, and great job at answering the questions. So.
Okay, thank you very much. And yeah, this was my very first webinar in my life, and
many more to come, and you will do just as well. And so,
yeah.
Thank you so much for all.
You're welcome, and thank you for attending this webinar.
Yes.
It was a very good experience.
Yes, and we could definitely use this kind of information for our future students. So like next semester, we can definitely use the kind of information you provided to help them. And yes, it was very useful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Very good to know.
All right. So I think you are good. You are all set. And for those of you that want to join in tomorrow's webinar in, I think about 5 hours. So I'm going to get some sleep, but then I will see you guys if you guys want to join me there. Okay?
Okay, perfect.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Or morning.
Right.
Good morning. All right. Bye, everyone.
All right, bye.
Nice day.